Are you afraid of breathing? Now, before you say, of course not, and move on to something else, let me tell you a quick story. Back when I was in my PhD program for psychology, I was driving home on the long but beautiful drive that I had for my commute along the California coast, and I realized I felt weird. I was slightly lightheaded, my fingers were a little bit tingly, and I felt like I wasn't breathing right. Like I wasn't getting enough oxygen or something just wasn't working the way it was supposed to. Now, I'm no stranger to breathing issues. I have had significant asthma since I was a child. I have allergies. I found out recently I have a big old deviated septum. Breathing isn't necessarily my strong suit, so having trouble with that, even wheezing, is a common experience for me. So I did what I would normally do. I took my inhaler, I rolled down the windows for a bit to get some fresh air, but I didn't feel better. In fact, the more I thought about it, the more symptoms I noticed. Eventually, on that ride, I got home, but this continued to be an issue day after day, especially that I noticed while I was driving. And it was starting to freak me out, because obviously I didn't want to pass out and veer off into the ocean while I was driving or into oncoming traffic. It got bad enough that I actually went to the pulmonologist, so a specialist in breathing and respiratory issues. They had me do a bunch of different tests, like sitting in a closed-off chamber while they measured my pulmonary function. And while I did indeed still have asthma, I was getting plenty of oxygen, and there wasn't any particular physical issue that was causing these new sensations that I was having. Turns out I was just getting in my head about it. The more that I thought about it, the more things I felt, and then that, of course, made the anxiety about it worse, and on, it became a cycle. Now, more recently, my partner confided in me that she's been feeling for a few weeks or even months like she isn't able to take a deep breath. When she focuses on it and looks and tries to take a deep breath, everything looks correct, but it doesn't feel right. Something's off. There's something missing in the connection between her mind and her lungs where those deep breaths just don't feel like they should. And this got me thinking about just how often I've actually heard this from people, especially clients of mine in my years of clinical work. It's not always exactly the same story. Sometimes it can be like me, where it feels like you're not actually getting enough oxygen in. Other times it's something that feels blocked and you don't feel like you can breathe well at all. The underlying similarity, though, is that there isn't anything physically wrong. You just get in your head about the idea of not being able to breathe right. Then what happens is this leads to avoidance. Not avoidance of breathing entirely. That would lead to passing out or potentially death, but instead avoidance by trying to distract yourself from paying attention to your breathing, or taking shallow breaths so you don't trigger any weird sensations that come along with deep breathing, or even checking over and over and over to see, did that breath feel right? Does this feel like I'm breathing the right way? Am I getting enough oxygen? And just checking in with yourself over and over again. And in this way, it can become somewhat compulsive, similar to what we see in obsessive compulsive disorder. Rather than chilling out and just being on good terms with our breathing, however it might happen, we take some sort of action to make ourselves feel better about it because we've become afraid of breathing. And it sucks, right? It can almost feel like a betrayal because it's such a fundamental natural action that becomes something to obsess over. But don't worry if you find yourself in this position, I have some ideas for you. In reflecting on this, I've come to realize that in the field of mental health, we suggest breathing exercises for a variety of purposes, but we may be missing out on one crucial use of breathing practices. Breathing can be helpful for relaxation training. Certain exercises can be great for building mindfulness, or even for physical training, like if you sing or play an instrument or perform a sport. But I think that we should also be using breathing exercises for exposure. Very briefly, we use exposure therapy in treating anxiety disorders. Anxiety basically tries to keep you safe by making you avoid things that it believes could be dangerous, even if in reality they are not dangerous. Instead, one of the most helpful things to do is counteract this and give yourself exposure to the triggers so they don't impact you as much. The same concept can be applied here. Now, at this point, I definitely don't blame you if you start to say, what the heck are you talking about? We literally breathe every moment of every day. This is how we stay alive. How can you use exposure work with something that you never stop doing? Don't we have a built-in exposure system? That's a great observation, right? Very helpful to recognize that your body isn't going to just give up on you, that breathing is an automatic process. It's going to happen no matter what. But no, that's not the kind of exposure that we need. Much like other forms of exposure work, it's not actually the act itself that we need to build a tolerance for. It's the discomfort and uncertainty that we need to build a tolerance for. That's the thing that anxious people hate, not knowing. There's a freakiness that comes along with focusing intensely on your breath. It's the uncertainty of not knowing if there's something actually wrong with you, the feeling of fear that you might pass out, that you might get too lightheaded and fall over. It's the mind games that eventually convince you that you're going to die. Now, provided that you've already ruled out any serious physical health issues like I did back when I went to the pulmonologist, that's not going to happen. As long as you're medically in the clear, there isn't really anything left to solve. It's not about making these weird feelings go away by compensating in some sort of way with your breathing or otherwise physically, or by thinking your way out of them, playing those mind games. It's actually about realizing that you're going to be okay and approaching the discomfort so you can get better at dealing with it. So how can you do this? How can you use exposure work to become less freaked out about breathing? I sort of already told you, breathing exercises, but how and what kind? I'm going to tell you, but really quick, let's take a break and talk about our sponsor for this episode. If you're anything like me, it is so easy to let personal care and self-care slip between shuttling kids around, doing things with the family, for work, for my other work, for my other work. It's very easy to let myself get lost in the shuffle. So it's very important to have some non-negotiables when it comes to self-care. For me, these are things like having some time to play video games by myself, making sure I get physical exercise, and making sure that I simply have time and space to think deeply about things. For you, it could be something else. It could be the gym, or it could be therapy. Therapy is a great place to prioritize yourself and to make sure that you're not letting yourself get lost in the shuffle. If you're thinking about starting therapy, there's a really great option that's so easy. Try BetterHelp. BetterHelp is entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Duff today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Duff for 10% off your first month. All right, let's get back to it. So getting back into the breathing, how do we do this? What kind of breathing exercises should we be using for exposure work? This is where I think some of the more challenging breathing exercises come into play. And I'll give you a few examples, but generally speaking, these are things that are a little bit more intense than just sitting and focusing on your breath. These are things where you're manipulating your breath and challenging yourself somewhat. So the first one I'll talk about is an exercise you can try called alternate nostril breathing. There are technically different forms of this, but one that I like using is you put your thumb and index finger on either side of your nose, or if you're missing a finger or can't do that, whatever adaptation works for you where you can plug both nostrils. But, essentially pinch your nose as if you smelled something bad or as if you were going to be going underwater. Now you close off one nostril and you breathe deeply in through the other one, filling your lungs entirely. I can barely breathe today, so this is a good example. So you breathe in, then you close that nostril off and switch to the other one being open. Exhale completely, and then breathe in through that same one that's open. And then switch. So basically what you're doing is you are covering one nostril, breathe in, switch, breathe out, breathe back in, switch, breathe out, breathe back in, switch, and so on. So generally there's a point where you do this and you start to feel a little bit weird, right? If I'm doing it myself, since I'm stuffy, it's going to take me a while to breathe in through my right nostril right now. And that might make me feel maybe a little bit lightheaded. It might make me feel like I'm running out of breath or a little tingly and like I'm running out of oxygen. All of these things are okay. When that happens, what I'd like you to do is keep going for a bit, and then you can return to your normal breathing. So push yourself just a little bit further. not in a way that's going to really, really be detrimental to you. Like if you actually do start to pass out, you don't need to keep it up. But typically, that's not actually going to happen. You just go for a little bit more, feel that discomfort. Don't try to push it away. Whenever you have these sensations, the fingers are a common one for me. For you, it might be feeling flushed or lightheaded. It might be actually a little panic symptoms of your heart racing. Whatever it is, don't try to just push those away. Don't shake your hands out to bring feelings back to your fingers. Don't shake your head to clear it. Just be with the feelings and notice how truthfully they're pretty inconsequential, because as soon as you stop doing that exercise, you're gently going to come back to your baseline. And then after a few minutes of breathing normally, repeat the process, go back into it. So that's alternate nostril breathing, one that takes a lot of focus, and it is a little bit challenging when it comes to how you're actually going through the process. Another one that you can do is what you might call resonance breathing. There are many techniques for this. There are books that dive deep into it to find the perfect breathing pace that matches with your heart rate. But in general, the thought is about 3 to 7 slow diaphragmatic breaths, which means, engaging your diaphragm, breathing from your belly all the way up. 3 to 7 per minute is a great pace. For me, I've found out that breathing in for 4 and breathing in for 4, no hold. Breathing out for 6. So no hold or rest in between, but breathing in for 4, breathing out for 6 is a really good pace for me. During the 4 count inhale, I try to breathe deeply from my belly and fill up my lungs entirely. And on the exhale, I try to focus on keeping a steady flow while getting rid of all that air. And just repeating that over and over again. So it looks a little something like this. So in doing that, I do feel a little bit lightheaded. I feel a little bit off from how I would be if I was just breathing kind of at a normal rate without fluctuating anything. And that's good. That's perfect for this circumstance where I'm trying to gain exposure to those strange feelings and not allow myself to avoid them and run away from them. So I'd want to do this for a few minutes maybe and just keep it going. And again, sit with those sensations. There are also variations and techniques that are a little bit more intense. Some of you have maybe heard of the Wim Hof method. I think there are multiple, but one of them is a phase of taking full deep breaths like we were just talking about. And then after a certain amount, you exhale entirely and then hold your breath for a certain period of time. So you exhale all the air and hold it, and then take a huge recovery breath and hold that. And then you turn to normal breathing. Right? So again, manipulating your breath, pushing yourself a bit. There are also about 1,000,001 different types of breathing exercises from yoga and similar traditions that we have appropriated here in the West. So you could learn about those, or even better, find somebody who's a guru in the traditional arts and learn from them. I know that Dr. K, a popular YouTuber, has a lot of videos showing some of the exercises that he likes. But yeah, basically anything that challenges you. I even stole one from a book. There's a book that I have read, or book series rather, called the Cradle series, which is, side note, very awesome series if you're into sort of progressive fantasy literature, getting better and better, gaining new skills, getting more powerful, that sort of thing. But there's a technique in one of the books, I forget which one in the series, but it's called the Heaven and Earth Purification Wheel. And basically in this book series, there's magic, and people use different meditation and breathing strategies to expand what they call their core, which is basically the capacity, the amount of madra or magical power that they can have at once. And so you do these exercises to either, channel your madra to different areas, to refine it, or to expand your core. And so I loved this exercise from the book. I thought it was really brilliant. Basically, in your mind, you imagine your core as a huge stone wheel, and it very slowly rolls back and forth, basically grinding back and forth. And you use this visualization to breathe along with it. And it's not meant to be relaxing. It's meant in the book to actually really strain you so that you can expand that core and be able to hold more energy. And it's pretty exhausting because what you do is you breathe in as slowly as you can. Basically try to fill your lungs fully, but as slowly as possible. So rather than taking 4 counts and just filling it all up, you breathe as slowly as you can. And then when you get to the top, same thing, you exhale as slowly and fully as you can. And then breathe in, and you just go back and forth, right? That big stone wheel rolling back and forth. And it really taxes you. It is not necessarily the most comfortable thing, but it's a great way of exposing you to those strange sensations that come along with changing your breathing patterns. Regardless of what type of breathing exercise you do, the most important thing is to do it often and in a space that you feel relatively safe. So this could be your office, your bedroom, somewhere in your house, or even when you're sitting by the beach, anywhere that feels just really good and safe to you. And you want to practice it as often as you can and increase the duration, how long you're practicing these exercises for. If you can do it just for a minute, that's great to start with. Can you go to 2? Can you go to 5? Shoot, can you go to 10? That's going to really help you get better at breathing. So you want to get better at the process of breathing. You want to get better at tolerating the different sensations associated with breathing. Essentially prove to your body that you are not going to be harmed, even if things feel a little off sometimes. If you avoid thinking about your breathing and you try to trick yourself into feeling better or convincing yourself that everything's okay, it's only going to make it worse. So by using breathing as an exposure exercise, you can master your breath and stop latching on to the small signs that something is wrong. So that's what I got for you. Pretty short and sweet, but I hope that this helps. I know this is a concept that's going to really, really land with some people, and for others, it might not be close to your experience, and that's okay. If you do try this out, please share your experiences with me. You can write in the comments on YouTube. You could shoot me a message on social media or to my email. And of course, if you have a question or a topic for the show that you'd like me to cover, send me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com, or you can use the contact form on my website. All of those are good ways to get in touch with me. I'll see you for the next episode. Bye.